3 weeks of harassment letters had drained me. I finally took a sleep aid that night, desperate for rest. That's why I didn't hear them. When I stepped outside at dawn, coffee still warm in my hand, my body went cold. A trench, 4 feet deep, 6 feet wide, carved around 3 sides of my property like a wound in the earth. Orange vests moved in the gray light. No one looked at me. Then I saw the logo on their trucks. Pinewood Services, LLC, Marilyn Keaton's company. The HOA president had escalated from letters to excavators. She wanted me gone, but she made one mistake. She didn't know Sheriff Hayes had already seen my footage. Every frame, every timestamp. If someone with power is trying to bury you right now, stay with me. This is how I buried them instead. The October air drifted through my workshop window, carrying the scent of pine and damp soil. I ran my hand along the oak frame I was building, feeling the grain beneath my calloused fingers. This had been my grandfather's workbench. His tools still hung on the pegboard behind me, exactly as he left them 15 years ago. Some people inherit money. I inherited sawdust, silence, and 2 acres of land that meant more than any bank account ever could. "Hold your ground, son," he told me once. "Your boundary is your dignity. Let someone move it once. They'll never stop." I am 42 years old now, a retired structural engineer who made furniture by hand because I wanted to. Not because I had to. I kept to myself, paid my dues, never caused trouble. I thought that would be enough. I was wrong. The knock came around 10 in the morning. 3 sharp raps, the kind that expected an answer. Marilyn Keaton stood on my porch with a clipboard pressed against her chest and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mid-50s, silver hair pulled tight, wearing a blazer despite the casual Saturday atmosphere. Everything about her screamed control. "Colton," she said, her voice sweet in a way that made my skin prickle. "I hope I'm not interrupting. The HOA board has been discussing some exciting developments. We're planning to expand the common park area, and your eastern half-acre would be perfect. We're prepared to offer a fair price." I leaned against the doorframe. "I appreciate you stopping by, Marilyn, but I'm not selling." Her smile flickered. "Perhaps you haven't considered the benefits. A larger park increases property values for everyone. Community spirit." My answer is still no. The sweetness drained from her face like water through a cracked cup. "You should think carefully. Colton, some of our newer regulations might affect older properties like yours. Compliance can be complicated." I met her gaze without blinking. "This house has a grandfather clause. I checked the documents when I moved back. The 1995 bylaws don't apply to structures built before the HOA existed." She tucked the clipboard under her arm. Something cold passed behind her eyes. "Laws can be reinterpreted. Boundaries can be resurveyed. I'm only trying to help you avoid unnecessary difficulties." Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the stone path like a countdown. I watched her silhouette disappear into a black sedan at the curb. Something had shifted. I could feel it, the way animals sense a coming storm. Inside, I pulled out the metal box where I kept my family's papers. The deed from 1978, the original property survey, the grandfather clause exemption, signed and notarized. Everything was in order. But the order hadn't saved Raymond Fletcher. My neighbor 2 houses down had sold his property 3 months ago and fled to Arizona. Before he left, he told me the HOA sent him 11 violation notices in 6 weeks. Fence too tall. Mailbox wrong shade of gray. 3 dandelions on his lawn. He was 74 and tired of fighting. Marilyn had worn him down like water-eroding stone. That evening, I drove to the hardware store. 2 security cameras, 1 for the front gate, 1 for the backyard. I mounted them myself before sunset, angling each lens to cover every approach to my property. Then I started a notebook, date, time, description. If they wanted to play games, I would keep score. Every move is documented, every violation logged. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Dignity isn't given, it's defended, as darkness fell. I sat on the porch with black coffee, watching streetlights flicker on one by one. Harold Dempsey, my neighbor to the north, walked past with his old beagle. He paused at my fence, glancing around before speaking low. Be careful with that woman. Colton. She doesn't lose. I haven't done anything wrong. Harold. He shook his head, weathered face creased with worry. Doesn't matter. She'll find a way. She always does. He shuffled on, the beagle sniffing at dead leaves. I watched him go, then looked toward the end of the street. Marilyn's house sat behind a tall hedge, barely visible except for a single light glowing in an upstairs window. A shadow moved behind the curtain, facing my direction, watching. I finished my coffee and went inside. Checked the camera feeds on my laptop. Green lights. Recording. Cloud backup enabled for 15 years. This property has been my sanctuary, the one place where the world couldn't reach me. Now the world was circling, looking for a way in. That night, for the first time since I moved back, I locked the back gate, not out of fear, out of principle. They wanted to test my boundaries. Fine, but they would learn what my grandfather taught me long ago. Some lines don't move. The first letter arrived 6 days after Marilyn's visit. Crisp white envelope, HOA logo stamped in the corner. Official, formal, designed to make you feel small. Violation notice, section 12.3, fence color non-compliant. Approved shade dove white, code OW01, remedy required within 14 days. I walked to my fence, white, the same white it had been for 3 years. I photographed it from 6 angles with timestamps, attached the original paint receipt, and sent my response before noon. 2 days later, another envelope, section 15.7, construction equipment visible from the roadway. My table saw, sitting in the open garage while I worked. I moved it inside, documented the empty space, and responded. Then came the third. Weeds in the lawn. The fourth, mailbox tilted 2 inches. The fifth, the vehicle parked 18 inches beyond the driveway edge. 5 letters in 14 days. Each one more absurd than the last. This wasn't about compliance. This was siege warfare, designed to bury me in paper until I surrendered. I started a notebook that first week and never stopped. Date, time, description, every letter, every photograph, every response. One system, one record, no gaps. If this ever reached a courtroom, I would have evidence they couldn't dispute. On day 12, I woke before dawn and found the first real sign of intrusion. My backyard camera had been tilted overnight, pointing at empty sky instead of the property line. The footage showed a figure in dark clothing approaching at 2:47 in the morning, reaching up with a gloved hand, adjusting the lens with practiced speed. Face hidden, no hesitation. Someone knew exactly where I was watching. I repositioned the camera and added a second one, hidden inside an old birdhouse my grandfather built decades ago. The lens peered through a knothole, invisible unless you knew to look. That night, I sat in darkness monitoring both feeds. Nothing moved, but the stillness felt wrong, heavy, like something waiting just beyond the frame. 3 days later, the black SUV appeared, 11:43 at night, rolling past my house with headlights dimmed, no plates visible. It stopped across the street for 4 minutes, engine idling, then vanished. The next night, same time, same position. 4 minutes of watching before it pulled away. By the end of the week, too. 5 appearances were logged, always late, always patient, always gone before I could confront whoever sat behind that tinted glass. On day 15, I drove to the HOA office to file a formal harassment complaint. The building sat at the center of Pinewood Grove, a converted colonial with white columns and an American flag hanging limp in dead air. Inside, artificial lavender masked something stale underneath. A young woman took my paperwork without meeting my eyes. "Someone will review this. Please have a seat." I waited in a plastic chair, watching employees drift through the hallway like ghosts with clipboards. That's when I saw him, mid-20s, badge from a surveying company clipped to his shirt. He carried a rolled tube of papers under one arm, walking fast until he noticed me. Then he slowed. Our eyes met, and his expression shifted into something raw. Guilt, or maybe a warning. He opened his mouth, glanced toward the inner office where Marilyn's voice echoed behind a half-open door, then closed it again. He looked away. I walked faster, disappeared around a corner before I could stand. 15 minutes later, Marilyn emerged. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me with that smile that never touched her eyes. "Colton, your complaint has been received, but the HOA has every right to conduct compliance inspections. If you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps this neighborhood isn't the right fit." I stood. "I'm not going anywhere. Marilyn, we'll see." The door clicked shut behind her. I drove home with her voice coiling through my thoughts. That evening, I spread everything across my kitchen table. 5 violation letters, footage of the camera tampering, 5 logged SUV appearances with timestamps, and the image burned into my memory of a young surveyor who wanted to speak but couldn't. Someone inside knew something. Someone was afraid. I copied all footage to an external drive, then uploaded encrypted duplicates to cloud storage. Redundancy. If they destroyed my cameras. The evidence would survive somewhere they couldn't reach. Outside. The street lay silent under amber light. The SUV didn't appear that night. Somehow, the absence felt worse than its presence. They were adjusting, recalculating, planning something I couldn't yet see. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. My grandfather's tools hung motionless on the workshop wall. His voice drifted up from memory. "Hold your ground." I intended to, but I also understood something Marilyn Keaton clearly didn't. I wasn't just holding ground. I was building a case. And she had already given me more material than she realized. Week 3 began with death. Not human, something older. I stepped onto my back porch with morning coffee and stopped cold. My grandmother's rose garden, 10 bushes she planted in 1962, stood withered and brown. Leaves curled inward like burned paper, stems blackened at the base. The soil around them reeked of chemicals, sharp and acrid, the unmistakable smell of industrial herbicide. I set down my coffee and knelt in the dirt, pressing my fingers into the earth that had nurtured these roses for over 60 years. Gone overnight. Murdered while I slept 20 feet away. I pulled up the footage from my hidden birdhouse camera. 2:14 in the morning. A figure in a dark hoodie crossed my property line from the east, moving with purpose. No flashlight. No hesitation. They carried a plastic container, unscrewing the cap as they walked. For 3 minutes. They poured liquid around each bush in methodical circles, then retreated the same way they came, face hidden beneath the hood. But the body was visible, height, build. The way they moved. I called the county sheriff's office and requested someone come out. Deputy Mendez arrived an hour later, young and polite, notebook open, but pen barely moving. He watched the footage twice, frowning. "I see the figure. Mr. Reese. But there's no face, no plate. Nothing that identifies who this is. They came from the direction of the HOA common area. That narrows it down." He shrugged apologetically. "It's circumstantial, without positive identification. We can't pursue charges. My advice: install better cameras, motion-activated lights. Make it harder for them to operate unseen. He left his card on my kitchen counter and drove away. I stood in the doorway watching his cruiser disappear, anger coiling tight in my chest. They had poisoned something irreplaceable, and the law couldn't touch them. Not yet. That afternoon, I ordered 2 more cameras, 4K resolution, infrared night vision, wider field of view. I mounted them at opposite corners of my property before sunset, hidden inside weathered wooden boxes that looked like old electrical housings. 4 eyes now instead of 2. 3 days later. Harold Dempsey appeared at my back fence, glancing over his shoulder like a man expecting to be followed. "Got a minute?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I walked him to my workshop where no one could see us from the street. He stood among my grandfather's tools, wringing his hands, looking 10 years older than the last time we spoke. "There was a meeting," he said. "Emergency session. 3 nights ago. Not on the public calendar. Marilyn called it after hours. Just the board and a few others." "What kind of meeting?" "They talked about problem properties, used that exact phrase, and they mentioned your name. Colton. Something about a boundary reassessment process, a way to prove certain homes are encroaching on community land." My stomach tightened. "That's impossible. My survey is from 1978. It's recorded with the county." Harold shook his head. "She has her own surveyor, her own lawyers. I don't know what they're planning." But she sounded confident, like it was already decided. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to meet Sarah and Wen, an attorney specializing in property law. Her office sat above a hardware store in the next town over, away from Pinewood Grove's reach. I spread my documents across her desk. Deed, original survey, grandfather clause exemption, 26 violation letters, footage files on a USB drive. She reviewed everything for an hour without speaking, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. Finally, she looked up. "Your grandfather clause is solid, legally. They can't force you to comply with regulations enacted after your property was established. But if they produce a survey showing your fence or structures encroach on HOA common land, they can file suit, force you to remove the encroachment, pay damages, potentially even condemn the affected portion. Their survey would be a lie. Then you need to prove that. Get your own licensed surveyor to reconfirm your boundaries. Document everything they do on or near your property. If they set foot on your land without permission, that's criminal trespass." I hired her on the spot. That night, I reviewed every frame of footage I had collected. The figure who poisoned my roses, the camera tamperer from week 2, the black SUV that circled my house like a vulture. I slowed the herbicide footage, watching the vandal's movements frame by frame. The height matched someone I had seen before. Tall, broad shoulders, a particular way of turning, leading with the right hip. I pulled up photos from the HOA website, scrolling through board member profiles until I found it. Grant Hollister, assistant to the president, Marilyn's right hand. The build was identical. The posture is unmistakable. I printed the comparison screenshots and added them to my file. Outside, autumn wind rattled the windows, carrying the first bite of the coming winter. They had killed my grandmother's roses. They had tampered with my cameras. They had surveyed my home and threatened my boundaries. And now I knew at least one face behind the shadows. I checked my camera feeds one final time before bed. 4 green lights, all recordings, all backed up. They thought they were tightening a noose. They didn't realize they were building my case for me. Every move they made left evidence. Every escalation gave me more ammunition. Let them come again. I would be watching. 3 weeks of harassment had ground me down to bone. The letters, the surveillance, the roses. My mind wouldn't stop running calculations even when I closed my eyes. That night, I finally broke down and took a sleep aid, something I hadn't touched in years. I needed silence. I needed rest. I got 4 hours of dreamless nothing before the world tore itself apart. The sound reached me through layers of chemical fog. Deep rumbling, metal grinding against earth, engines straining under heavy loads. I forced my eyes open at 6:12 in the morning. Head thick, limbs sluggish, already knowing something was catastrophically wrong. I stumbled to the front door in yesterday's clothes, opened it, and felt my stomach drop through the floor. A trench, 4 feet deep, 6 feet wide, carved into the earth around 3 sides of my property like a wound that would never heal. Yellow excavators sat idle now, their work nearly complete. 5 men in orange vests stood around smoking cigarettes, not one of them looking in my direction. I walked toward the nearest machine on legs that barely felt connected to my body. The scale of it overwhelmed me. They had cut through my lawn, through the strip of wildflowers my grandmother planted along the eastern boundary, through 30 feet of root systems that had taken decades to establish. The trench wrapped from the southeast corner, along the back, and up the western side, stopping just short of the street. My driveway remained accessible, but barely. A narrow strip of undisturbed ground, maybe 8 feet wide, connected my property to the road. Everything else was severed. I approached the foreman, a thick-necked man in his 50s with a clipboard and the disinterested expression of someone just doing a job. "What is this?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. He glanced up, unsurprised. "Drainage improvement project. Community infrastructure. We have authorization from the Homeowners Association." He held out a document. I took it, scanning the text. Official HOA letterhead. Signatures from 3 board members. A reference to Section 22.6 of the Community Charter regarding public utility easements. "This is my private property. You're digging on my land." The foreman shrugged. "The survey says differently. According to our records, we're 3 feet inside the community easement. Take it up with the HOA." I pulled out my phone and dialed Marilyn's direct line. 4 rings. Voicemail. I called the HOA office. Closed. Saturday. Of course. They had planned this for a weekend. When no one would answer, I stepped back and started recording video. The trench. The machines. The workers. The logo is painted on every vehicle. Pinewood Services, LLC. I had seen that name before. In the county business registry. When I researched Marilyn's connections, she owned 60% of this company. Grant Hollister was listed as operations manager. They weren't hiding anymore. They were showing me exactly what they could do. I called Sarah, my lawyer, keeping the camera rolling. She answered on the second ring. "Colton. It's early. They're digging a trench around my house. 3 sides, 4 feet deep, claiming it's a drainage easement." Silence. Then her voice sharpened. "Don't interfere physically. Don't touch the workers or equipment. But document everything. Every angle. Every face. Every license plate. Call the sheriff and request an officer on scene. This might be criminal trespass depending on where exactly they're digging." I hung up and kept filming. The foreman had moved away, speaking into his phone with his back turned. I circled closer, pretending to record the excavators. His voice carried in the morning stillness. "Yes, ma'am. Almost finished. He's out here recording." A pause. "Understood. If he tries to interfere, we call it an obstruction." Another pause. I recognized the cadence of the voice on the other end. Marilyn. I couldn't hear her exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. Clipped. Commanding. Certain. "Yes, ma'am. We'll wrap up by noon." He ended the call and walked toward the nearest excavator without looking at me. I checked my recording. The audio had captured his side of the conversation clearly, combined with the business registration showing Marilyn's ownership. It was another thread in the web I was weaving. An hour later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. Not Mendez this time. An older woman named Hayes, with gray streaks in her hair and eyes that missed nothing. She walked the perimeter of the trench slowly, examining the dig marks, the property stakes, the position of each machine. Then she came to stand beside me on my porch. "Do you have documentation of your property lines? Original survey from 1978, recorded with the county. And they claim an easement, a drainage easement that didn't exist until this morning." She nodded, pulling out a card. "I'm going to request the HOA's documentation through official channels. This doesn't look right to me, but I need to see their paperwork before I can act. In the meantime, keep recording, keep copies off-site, and call me directly if they set foot past that trench line." She handed me the card. Sheriff Donna Hayes, a direct number handwritten on the back. By noon, the workers had packed up and driven away, leaving behind a scar in the earth that made my property look like an island surrounded by a moat. Harold sent a text around 2 in the afternoon. "I'm sorry, Colton. Can't get involved. She threatened code violations at my place. I have to think about my wife." I didn't blame him. Marilyn had been building this machine for years. Everyone in Pinewood Grove lived inside her fist, whether they acknowledged it or not. That evening, I sat on my porch as the sun bled red across the horizon. The trench sat dark and silent, a physical wall between me and the rest of the neighborhood. They had trapped me, isolated me, cut me off from the world I had known for 15 years. But they had also given me something. Evidence, documentation, a sheriff who didn't look the other way. Marilyn Keaton thought she was closing a trap. She didn't realize she had just handed me the key. Sheriff Hayes arrived at 7 the next morning, alone, driving an unmarked sedan instead of a patrol car. She parked on the narrow strip of driveway that still connected my property to the street and walked toward my porch with a manila folder tucked under her arm. No uniform today. Jeans, a gray jacket, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked like someone's grandmother, but her eyes carried the same sharpness I had noticed the day before. "Didn't want to attract attention," she said, gesturing at the car. "Marilyn Keaton has friends in the department. Not everyone, but enough. I figured we should talk privately." I led her inside and opened my laptop on the kitchen table. For the next 90 minutes, she watched everything. 3 weeks of footage, organized by date. The camera is tampering. The black SUV appearances. The figure poisoning my grandmother's roses. The excavation crew and their foreman's phone call. She took notes in a small leather journal, pausing the video occasionally to write down timestamps. When the last clip ended, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. This is systematic harassment, possibly conspiracy to commit fraud, depending on what their survey actually says. They're claiming a drainage easement that never existed. I requested their documentation yesterday. I should have it by Monday. She closed her journal and looked at me directly. "Mr. Reese, I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I've seen HOA disputes before. Petty fines, neighbor feuds, that sort of thing. This is different. Someone with resources is trying to take your land through coordinated intimidation. That's not a civil matter anymore." I asked her what I should do next. "Keep documenting. Don't engage with them directly. And if anything else happens, call me before you call the main office." She left her card on my table, the same one from yesterday, and drove away as quietly as she had arrived, for the first time in weeks. I felt something other than a siege mentality. Not hope, exactly, but the sense that someone in authority was finally paying attention. The envelope appeared 2 hours later. No knock, no doorbell. I found it on my front mat when I stepped outside to check the mail. A plain white rectangle with no return address. My name written in hurried handwriting. Inside were 2 items: a folded piece of paper covered in handwritten text, and a large document that crinkled when I unrolled it. A survey map, official stamps, boundary lines drawn in precise blue ink. The handwritten note was brief, but devastating. Mr. Reese, my name is Eli Turner. I work for Grayson Surveying, the company Marilyn Keaton hired to assess your property. 3 weeks ago, she instructed us to produce a modified boundary map showing your eastern fence line 3 feet inside community land. The map I've included is the original survey, matching county records from 1978. The version she plans to submit to the court has been altered. I don't have copies of the fake, but I watched them create it. I can't testify publicly. I'll lose my job, and she'll bury me in legal fees. But I couldn't stay silent. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. E.T. I spread both maps across my kitchen table. The one from Eli, dated 1978, showed my property boundaries exactly as my grandfather's deed described. The eastern line ran along a row of iron stakes that still existed, buried under years of grass and soil. I had located them myself when I first moved back, using a metal detector to confirm their positions. If Marilyn's altered version shifted that line 3 feet west, my fence would appear to encroach on HOA common land. My grandmother's rose garden, now dead, would have been planted on public property. The trench they dug yesterday would fall just inside the fake boundary, making it technically legal under their fraudulent survey. The scheme was elegant in its cruelty. Manufacture evidence, claim encroachment, force me to remove structures, pay fines, or sell at a loss, all while hiding behind official-looking documents that no one would think to question. I photographed every inch of Eli's map, then scanned it at high resolution and uploaded copies to 3 separate cloud accounts. The original went into my fireproof safe, alongside my grandfather's deed. That afternoon, I drove to Sarah's office and laid everything out. She studied the maps for 20 minutes, comparing coordinates, checking reference points against county records she pulled up on her computer. When she finished, her expression had hardened into something between anger and anticipation. This is fraud, clear, documentable fraud. If we can prove the altered survey exists, Marilyn Keaton and everyone involved could face criminal charges, forgery, conspiracy, possibly racketeering if we can show a pattern of similar behavior with other property owners. Eli said he can't testify. He might not have to. If Sheriff Hayes can obtain the fake survey through official channels, we can compare it to the original ourselves. The discrepancies will speak for themselves. She made copies of everything and locked them in her office safe. Colton, you've built a stronger case than most attorneys see in a decade of property disputes. But Marilyn doesn't know that yet. Right now, she thinks you're isolated and desperate. That's an advantage. Let her keep believing it until we're ready to move. I drove home as the sun sank toward the tree line, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The trench still surrounded my property, a dark gash in the earth that would take months to fill. But something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just defending anymore. I was preparing to strike back. That evening, I found Eli Turner's work email through his company's website and sent a brief message. Thank you. You did the right thing. When this is over, I'll make sure you're protected. I didn't expect a response, but 30 minutes later, a single line appeared in my inbox. Be careful. She's planning something for this week. I don't know what, but Grant has been at the office every night. I read the words 3 times, then added them to my file. Whatever Marilyn was planning, she had made one fatal miscalculation. She thought I was alone. She didn't know I had a sheriff reviewing my footage, a lawyer preparing countermeasures, and a witness who had just given me the weapon I needed to end this. Let her come. I was ready. The lawsuit arrived on Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who wouldn't meet my eyes. I signed for the envelope and carried it inside, already knowing what I would find. Plaintiff Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association. Defendant Colton Reese. Cause of action: encroachment on community common land. Violation of HOA covenant sections 12 through 18. Demand for removal of non-compliant structures and monetary damages in the amount of $75,000. Attached to the complaint was a survey map. I unfolded it slowly, comparing it to the original Eli had sent. The differences were subtle, but devastating. My eastern boundary had been shifted 3 feet west, placing my fence, my workshop, and the remnants of my grandmother's rose garden on what the document claimed was HOA property. They had erased 60 years of history with a few strokes of blue ink. That afternoon, Marilyn sent a community-wide email. I received a copy because my address was still on the neighborhood listserv. Dear Pinewood Grove residents, it began. The HOA board has been forced to take legal action against a property owner who has repeatedly violated our community standards and encroached upon shared land. We ask for your support as we protect the integrity of our neighborhood. Signs expressing community solidarity are available at the main office. By evening, 3 houses on my street displayed hand-painted placards in their front yards. We support our HOA. Community first. Rules matter. No one knocked on my door. No one asked for my side. The isolation I had felt since the trench was dug became something heavier, visible, intentional. I was being erased from the community before the court case even began. Harold's blinds stayed closed whenever I looked toward his house. I understood. Fear was a powerful silencer. Sheriff Hayes called at 4:17 the next afternoon. Her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. I got the HOA's documentation. Their survey doesn't match county records. The original filing from 1978 shows your boundary exactly where you said it was. Someone altered the coordinates. Eli Turner told me they fabricated it. I know. I've been doing some digging of my own. Pinewood Services LLC, the company that dug your trench, is 60% owned by Marilyn Keaton. Grant Hollister is listed as Chief Operations Officer. They've been billing the HOA for services at 3 times market rate for the past 4 years. This isn't just about your land. Colton, this is a pattern. She paused. I'm requesting a warrant to search the HOA office, but these things take time, and I'm worried they might try something before I can act. I need you to do something for me. Name it. Add more cameras, hidden ones. Cover every angle around that trench. If they come back, I want footage that leaves no room for doubt. I drove to a security supply store 2 towns over and purchased 2 weatherproof cameras disguised as garden lights. Solar-powered, motion-activated, with built-in microphones sensitive enough to capture conversation from 30 feet away. I installed them at opposite corners of the trench before sunset, angling them to cover the approaches from the street and the HOA common area. 6 cameras now watched my property. 6 digital witnesses that never blinked. That night, I sat in my darkened living room with my laptop open, the screen divided into 6 feeds. The trench glowed faintly under starlight, a black scar cutting through silver grass. I waited. At 11:47, headlights appeared at the end of my street. The black SUV rolled slowly past the first row of houses, then pulled to the curb 50 yards from my driveway and killed its lights. 2 figures emerged, even in the darkness. I recognized Grant Hollister's broad shoulders and distinctive gait. The second man was shorter, dressed in work clothes, carrying something bulky under his arm. They crossed the street and approached the trench from the northeast corner. Staying low, moving with the confidence of men who believed they were invisible. Grant carried a metal stake and a small sledgehammer. The other man held a sign, white background with bold red letters. They stopped at the edge of my property, just inside my legal boundary line according to the original survey. Grant drove the stake into the ground with 3 heavy swings. The other man attached the sign and stepped back to admire their work. Public land, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. The microphone on my garden light camera captured every word that followed. Grant's voice, clear as a confession. Done. Tomorrow morning. Photographs show he's built structures on public land. The sign proves the boundary was always here. Mrs. Keaton will have her evidence, and this whole thing wraps up by next month." The shorter man laughed. "He never saw it coming." "Nobody ever does." I was already dialing Sheriff Hayes before they turned back toward their vehicle. She answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. "They're here," I said, keeping my tone flat and controlled. "2 men, Grant Hollister and 1 other. They just planted a fake public land sign inside my property line. I have it all on camera, video and audio." A pause. Then her voice hardened. "Do not go outside. Do not confront them. I'm dispatching units now. 15 minutes. They're heading back to their car. Let them. We'll intercept before they leave the neighborhood. Stay inside and keep recording." I watched on screen as Grant and his accomplice walked casually toward the SUV, unaware that everything they had done and said now existed in digital permanence. They climbed into the vehicle. The engine started. Headlights flicked on. In the distance, I heard sirens. Faint at first, then growing louder, converging from multiple directions. Grant's SUV began to pull away from the curb just as red and blue lights appeared at the end of the street. I saved every file across all 6 cameras, backed them up to the cloud, and allowed myself one slow breath. Marilyn Keaton had sent her men to bury me. Instead, they handed me the shovel. Game over. The arrest happened fast. I watched through my window as 2 patrol cars converged on the black SUV. Blocking it from both ends of the street, Grant Hollister stepped out with his hands raised. Confusion twisting into panic as officers approached with weapons drawn. His accomplice tried to run, made it maybe 20 feet before a deputy tackled him into someone's manicured lawn. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Voices barked commands. Within minutes. Both men sat handcuffed in the back of separate cruisers, their faces pale under the red and blue strobes. Sheriff Hayes arrived shortly after, walking the scene with methodical calm. She examined the fake sign still planted inside my property line, photographed it from multiple angles, then crossed the trench using a temporary plank one of her deputies had laid down. I met her at my front door. "Got them," she said, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had waited a long time for this moment. "Grant is already talking, blaming everything on Marilyn. Says she orchestrated the entire operation." She asked to see my footage. I played her the clips from all 6 cameras, the audio crisp and damning, Grant's voice identifying Marilyn by name, his confession about manufacturing evidence, the casual cruelty of men who believed they were untouchable. Hayes listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When it ended, she nodded once. "This is enough for the warrant. We're executing the search at the HOA office first thing tomorrow morning. I want you there as a witness, but stay back. Don't engage with anyone directly." I agreed. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat on my porch until dawn, watching the trench fade from black to gray as the sky lightened, somewhere across the neighborhood. Marilyn Keaton was waking up to a day she hadn't anticipated. I wondered if she felt it coming, that prickling sensation at the back of the neck when the world is about to shift beneath your feet. Probably not. People like her never saw the fall until they were already in the air. The search began at 8:14 the next morning. 4 patrol cars and an unmarked sedan pulled into the HOA parking lot as I watched from across the street. Sheriff Hayes led the team, warrant in hand, flanked by 6 deputies and 2 officers from the county fraud unit. Marilyn appeared at the front entrance before they reached the door, dressed in her usual blazer and pressed slacks, silver hair immaculate. She looked ready for a board meeting, not an arrest. "What is the meaning of this?" Her voice carried across the parking lot, sharp and imperious. "This is private property. You have no authority here." Hayes held up the warrant. "We have a court order to search these premises in connection with an ongoing fraud investigation. You can cooperate, or you can be removed. Your choice." For a moment, Marilyn stood frozen. Then she stepped aside, her composure cracking at the edges. Deputies streamed past her into the building. I stayed where Hayes had positioned me, near the edge of the lot, close enough to observe but far enough to remain uninvolved. The search took 3 hours. Officers emerged periodically carrying boxes of documents, hard drives, filing cabinets worth of records. A crowd gathered as the morning progressed, neighbors walking dogs, retirees pretending to check their mail. By 10 o'clock, at least 30 residents stood watching the HOA headquarters being systematically dismantled. I recognized faces, people who had displayed support signs in their yards just yesterday, people who had avoided my eyes for weeks. Now they watched in silence, uncertainty replacing the comfortable certainty Marilyn had cultivated for years. At 11:22. Hayes walked out the front entrance holding a thick folder. She crossed directly to where Marilyn stood near the parking lot entrance, surrounded by 2 deputies who had been keeping her contained. "Marilyn Keaton," Hayes said, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit property theft, falsification of official documents, and misuse of fiduciary position. You have the right to remain silent." Marilyn's facade shattered. The controlled politician vanished, replaced by something raw and furious. "This is absurd. I have protected this community for 12 years. Everything I did was for Pinewood Grove. That man," she pointed directly at me, her finger trembling with rage, "doesn't belong here. His property is an eyesore, a relic. I was trying to improve our neighborhood, and you're treating me like a criminal." Hayes didn't flinch. "You fabricated survey documents to steal a man's land. You directed employees to vandalize his property. You used HOA funds to pay a company you secretly owned. Those aren't improvements. Mrs. Keaton, those are felonies. He doesn't deserve that land." Marilyn's voice rose to a scream. "His grandfather was a nobody, a carpenter who built an ugly house on prime real estate. I offered him fair compensation. I gave him every chance to leave gracefully. He refused. What was I supposed to do? Let one stubborn fool ruin everything I built?" The crowd murmured. Someone was recording on their phone. Marilyn's words hung in the morning air like smoke, impossible to unsay. Hayes gestured to her deputies. "Take her." They led Marilyn to a waiting cruiser, her wrists cuffed behind her back. She kept talking, kept justifying, kept condemning herself with every sentence. The woman who had controlled this neighborhood through fear and manipulation was dragging herself down in full public view. And she couldn't stop. I watched her disappear into the back seat, watched the door close, watched the cruiser pull away. No satisfaction filled me, no triumph, just a hollow relief, like setting down a weight I had carried so long I forgot it was there. Harold Dempsey appeared beside me, his old beagle panting at his feet. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching the remaining officers load evidence into their vehicles. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I should have stood with you. Colton. I was afraid." "I know. Does that make it okay?" I considered the question. The weeks of isolation, the silence when I needed voices, the blinds that stayed closed while my world was being torn apart. "No," I said. "But I understand." He nodded slowly, shame evident in the slump of his shoulders. "What happens now?" I looked at the HOA building, its doors propped open, its secrets exposed to daylight. "Now," I said, "we rebuild, all of us." The trial concluded 6 weeks later in the county courthouse, a brick building that smelled of old wood and older justice. I sat in the gallery beside Sarah, watching as Judge Patricia Hartwell delivered her verdict with the measured cadence of someone who had seen every kind of human failing and no longer flinched at any of it. Marilyn Keaton stood at the defense table in a gray suit, her silver hair less immaculate than before, her posture rigid but diminished. Grant Hollister sat at a separate table. having taken a plea deal that required his testimony against his former employer. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors from Pinewood Grove filled the benches, some who had supported Marilyn until the end, others who had quietly watched from the sidelines. Harold sat 3 rows behind me. Eli Turner was present too, seated near the back, looking younger and more fragile than I remembered. Judge Hartwell read the charges and findings aloud. Fraud in the first degree, conspiracy to commit theft of property, falsification of official survey documents, embezzlement of homeowners association funds totaling over $280,000 across 4 years. Harassment and intimidation. Criminal trespass. The list continued for nearly 10 minutes, each count landing like a hammer strike in the silent courtroom. When she finished, the judge removed her glasses and addressed Marilyn directly. "Mrs. Keaton, you held a position of trust in your community. Residents relied on you to manage shared resources fairly and transparently. Instead, you exploited that trust to enrich yourself and punish anyone who challenged your authority. Your actions caused financial harm, emotional distress, and lasting damage to the social fabric of Pinewood Grove." She paused, letting the words settle. "For these crimes, I sentence you to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 30 months. You are further ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $175,000 to the Homeowners Association, $75,000 to Mr. Colton Reese for damages to his property and legal expenses. You are permanently barred from holding any fiduciary or management position in any residential community organization." Marilyn's attorney requested leniency, citing her years of community service. The judge denied it without hesitation. Grant Hollister received 18 months in county jail, $50,000 in fines, and 200 hours of community service. His cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence, but the judge made clear that following orders was not a defense for criminal conduct. 2 other HOA board members who had signed off on the fraudulent documents received suspended sentences and probation. The company that produced the fake survey, Grayson Surveying, lost its state license and faced a separate civil lawsuit from the county. When the gavel fell for the final time, I felt something release in my chest. Not joy, not vindication, something quieter. The sensation of a door closing on a room I never wanted to enter again. Sarah squeezed my arm. "It's done. Colton, you won." I nodded, but the word felt wrong. Winning implied a game. This had been survival. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of work. I hired a landscaping crew to fill the trench, hauling in fresh soil and seed to cover the scar that had surrounded my property for nearly 2 months. The eastern boundary, where my grandmother's roses once grew, I handled myself. I couldn't replace what Marilyn had destroyed. Those bushes had been planted in 1962, nurtured through decades of seasons, carriers of memory that no nursery could replicate. But I could plant new ones, different varieties, chosen for their resilience, arranged in the same pattern my grandmother had established, a continuation rather than a replacement. Harold appeared at my fence one Saturday morning, carrying a bucket of white paint and a brush. He didn't ask permission, just started working on the section nearest the street, applying careful strokes to wood that had weathered through all of this without breaking. We worked in silence for an hour before he spoke. "The new HOA board held their first meeting last night, open to all residents. Transparent minutes posted online within 24 hours. I dipped my brush and kept painting. "Good. They voted to formally apologize to you. There's a letter coming, and they're revising the bylaws to prevent anything like this from happening again. Mandatory audits, term limits, no board member can have financial ties to any contractor." I looked at him then, this man who had hidden behind closed blinds while my world erred. His face carried the weight of his choices, etched into lines that hadn't been there 2 months ago. "It's a start," I said. He nodded slowly. I know it doesn't fix what I did, or didn't do, but I'm trying. Colton, we all are. Eli Turner came by a week later, driving a truck with a new company logo on the door. A firm out of the next county had hired him after Sheriff Hayes wrote a letter explaining his role in exposing the fraud. He brought a framed copy of my original survey, the one he had risked his career to deliver, mounted on archival paper with the county seal clearly visible. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing it to me on the porch. "To remember." And I hung it in my workshop, next to my grandfather's tools, 2 artifacts from different generations, both testaments to the same truth. Some things are worth protecting, even when the cost is high. Sheriff Donna Hayes stopped by on a Tuesday afternoon, off duty, carrying a basket of apples from her sister's orchard. We sat on the porch drinking coffee while autumn leaves drifted across the yard, the air carrying the first real bite of approaching winter. "You handled this the right way," she said. "A lot of people in your position would have done something stupid, confronted them, made threats, given them ammunition to use against you." I watched a leaf spiral down into the freshly planted garden bed. My grandfather taught me that boundaries aren't about walls. They're about clarity, knowing where you stand and making sure others know it too. Violence is what happens when people stop believing in boundaries. I never wanted to stop believing. She smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her. "He sounds like a wise man. He was a carpenter, built this house with his own hands, never made much money, never wanted to. Just wanted a piece of land he could call his own and the freedom to live on it without interference." I gestured at the property around us, the repaired fence, the fresh soil, the new roses waiting for spring. "Marilyn called him a nobody, said this house was an eyesore, but it's still standing, and she's in a cell." Hayes raised her coffee cup in a small salute. "To nobodies everywhere." I returned the gesture. That evening, after she left, I walked the perimeter of my property for the first time since the trench was filled. The ground felt solid beneath my feet. The boundary markers stood where they had always stood. Iron stakes driven deep by surveyors in 1978, undisturbed by everything that had tried to move them. I stopped at the eastern corner, where the new roses caught the last light of sunset. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory, steady and certain. "Hold your ground, son. Your boundary is your dignity." I had held it, through letters and lies, through poison and trenches, through silence and betrayal. The boundary remained, and so did I, above me. The first stars emerged in a darkening sky. I stood there until full night arrived, breathing air that smelled of turned earth and new beginnings. They had tried to bury me. Instead, I planted roots. Marilyn Keaton thought she could erase a man's legacy with forged documents and heavy machinery. She was wrong, because when you stand your ground with evidence instead of anger, with patience instead of violence, the truth has a way of surfacing. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt powerless against someone who believed the rules didn't apply to them, you're not alone. This channel exists because these stories need to be told. Every subscription, every comment, every share tells the algorithm that people care about justice, that boundaries matter, that the little guy can win. So if you haven't already, consider joining this community. Hit subscribe. Leave a comment telling me where you watched from today. And if you know someone fighting their own HOA nightmare, send them this video. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward fighting back.